This is Let's Get Growing with horticulturalist Nathan Wilson at Lanier Nursery and Gardens in Flowery Branch. Get information you need for gardening, landscaping, and home plant care. We're taking your calls right now at 706-865-3181 or email info@WRWH.com. Now, here's Nathan.
Good morning, gang. Welcome to the program. It's been a wild and crazy week, especially with weather. We've had some great, I think I start out the program with weather every Saturday. It seems like I'm always talking about the weather, but it's very important because, of course, in the great state of Georgia, as they say, if you don't like the weather, what? Just hang around for maybe 5 minutes. Because today, of course, as Jimmy has already talked about, Jimmy O'Neill with Northeast Georgia Living this morning at 7:30, he has talked about what a gloomy day it is. And we passed each other in the studio here in the hallway and was talking. He does not like this weather. But, you know, I say if it's going to be cold, it might as well be wet. It might as well be a nice Georgia southern winter for sure. But here we are, and regardless, it's a great day. Regardless of the weather, it's a great day for you to be listening to the radio, listening to WRWH, your favorite station. Last week, you may recall that we discussed garden design. It was all about garden design. And basically, I think hopefully it wasn't too much information, but I wanted to give you a quick rundown of design elements, design principles, tips for getting your best garden ever. Your best garden ever is what we're looking for, right? If you look out on this dreary day, you'll see that most of the leaves on the trees have fallen. There may be a few oaks that are still hanging around. But regardless, you can kind of get an idea for the architecture that's in your garden. You can look around and you can see things that maybe you couldn't see when the leaves were on the trees and on the shrubs. And now's a good time to start planning, a good time to start drawing out some ideas, maybe looking on your Pinterest accounts and Facebook and whatnot, and getting some ideas for changing the landscape, because garden design is important. Garden design is important. And one of the most important aspects of planting is planting in mass, grouping things together. There was a horticulturalist who was born before the Civil War and died in the 1950s. His name is Liberty Hyde Bailey, one of my favorite horticulturists, probably the most important horticulturalist we'll find out of this century, or this past century. And he said that a mass has the greater value because it presents a much greater range and variety of forms, colors, shades, and textures, because it has sufficient extent or dimensions to add structural character to a place. Basically, he goes on to say that he would rather have a bare and open pasture than a yard that is full of randomly placed plants, even if those are the choicest and unusual plants of the entire world. When we plant in mass, we get impact. And today we call this idea of planting in mass, we call it swaths. They're large bands or groupings of the same types of plants. Very impactful. I will mention that the Georgia DOT has gotten swaths down to a tune. Because if you're driving up and down the highways or the interstates, on the exit ramps, you'll notice that there are all of these mass plantings. One of the most overly used plants now, I think, on the highways is muhly grass. I saw a group of muhly grass separated by some other type of grass I couldn't identify. And then there was more muhly grass behind that. It was just way too much. But muhly grass is a great plant, especially when it's planted in mass or in swaths. So as you're out there looking around today, do you have a bunch of randomly placed plants in your landscape? Or do you have plants that are grouped together that give you the most impact, to give you that sufficient extent and dimension that adds structural character to your place? That's what Liberty Hyde Bailey said, and I encourage you to check him out. He's got a lot of great old books, things that were written before the 1900s and then after the 1900s. So really cool stuff to look back in history and see how things were done there. Now, when we talk about landscape design, I don't want to talk much more about it, just to kind of summarize from last week. We want to be able to create a sense of place. Create a sense of place. let's say you are a traveler and you've been around the world and you've seen plenty of gardens and plenty of different places. Well, each one of these places you travel to, and hey, it doesn't have to be around the world. It could be around the nation. It could be around the state. But each one of these places you go to has its own atmosphere. It has its own mood or feeling. And you're trying to do the same thing with your place. Your place needs to have its own mood or feeling. How are you going to create that? What kind of mood or feeling will you create? Back in the 90s and maybe a little before, there was a big it was popular to create places that felt like a Japanese garden, using conifers from Japan, using Japanese maples and whatnot. And so we see people maybe getting away from that a little bit, but regardless, the idea is there, that you're trying to create a sense of place. This morning, as you look out your window, you see the raindrops and you see your landscape. Are you stuck with your garden design? Are you having troubles? Well, you can call me with your questions about garden design and any other garden topic you may want to discuss. You can call me at 706-865-3181. And when you do, you will hear the voice, the smooth voice of my producer, Buster Talent, and he will be glad to get you with me on the air. Now, this morning, you can also send us a message, or throughout the week, if you'd like, you can send it to info@WRWH.com. That's info@WRWH.com. You can type out your message there, and you can get in touch with us that way. Now, on another note, you can also join us on Facebook. We are going to be on Facebook, and you can find our old shows there. We have a video aspect on Facebook, so not only do you get to hear, but you get to see us. And if you miss any of our programs, you can go back and research them. Go find them at youtube.com. Just search WRWH, and you can visit the older shows from, well, summer, fall, and now winter. And we're heading into spring in a few months, I guess, so we'll have some spring editions to come. But you can always find the shows, the older shows, there at youtube.com. Now, again, we are going to discuss some things that are happening in our landscape this time of year and things that you need to be doing. The first thing we want to talk about today is winter weeds. As you have noticed, probably, we have winter weeds popping up left and right. And I'm going to talk about 4 in particular that you want to be on the lookout for, because once they get started, they will come back year after year. And as a matter of fact, one of them will be there year after year if it's not taken care of. But the first one would be annual bluegrass. Annual bluegrass, also known to the scientists as Poa annua, is a cute little, mainly bunch-style grass. It doesn't really have many runners. It can have some short runners, but mainly it stays in this nice little green bunch. But the problem is, they reseed readily and overwhelmingly. That little baby, within 6 weeks of germination, will begin to flower, and you will have plenty of seed to pop up next year. And so it's a major problem, especially in lawns and turf grass. And if you are paying someone to maintain your lawn, they should have already applied pre-emergence. Right now, it's probably too late, way too late. I've already seen some annual bluegrass blooming and seeding, and so that would not be of a benefit. But if you are paying someone, then you need to be sure that they are putting down pre-emergence. But if not, you can also overspray that very carefully, or, of course, you can pluck them out by hand. Now, the next winter weed we want to discuss is called chickweed. Chickweed is another cute little weed, and what I mean is it stays low to the ground, but it spreads out like a mat. They have tiny leaves and tiny little bitty white flowers, and like I said, they form these large mats of foliage, so it can become a problem. It can become a problem very quickly, especially since they reseed. Now, so far, we've talked about annual weeds, and annual weeds are going to be weeds that complete their life cycle in one season. So they go from seed, germinate, flower and go back to seed, and then they'll pass away, but they've left their little seedling babies behind for next year. So you want to make sure you get all of these weeds before they flower. If you see them flowering, then you know that seed is going to be coming around in just a few days. Now, the interesting thing about chickweed, it's not native here. It's a plant that came from Europe, Britain, that area, and it's completely edible. It's completely edible. If you know chickweed, maybe you didn't know it was completely edible, you can eat all parts of the plant, and the fresh little green leaves are used on salads in some parts of the world. I don't think that I want to eat a weedy salad, but if you'd like, you can go and weed and then have your lunch right after you finish weeding. Let's move on to a couple of perennial weeds. We've got violet. Excuse me. Of course, violets are cute little flowers, and you can find them in the woods. You can find them, of course, in your turf grass and your lawn. They'll pop up. They can handle a lot of shade, but they do have, in my opinion, pretty little pansy-like flowers. Generally, they're purple, or they may have some white, or they may be a mixture of both. Those are generally the common colors you'll see, but they do look like pansy or viola flowers, and the reason is because they're in the same family. They're very closely related. Now, normally, when you're mowing your lawn, those flowers are going to be mowed off, and they're not going to be able to reseed, which is exactly what you want. But the problem is, particularly in the spring, as it gets a little warmer, they can produce flowers that are low to the ground underneath the blade of your mower, and then they don't get mowed, so they produce seed, and then you're stuck with these mats and mats of these violets popping up. Now, in a wild area, it may be appropriate, or I have a good friend, customer. She's probably listening to the show this morning, who sent me a message and said, I got these violets, what do I do with them? She said, I really like them. And I said, well, if you really like them, make sure they don't get out of hand, but enjoy them. Let them grow. Let them flourish. And that's the difference between a weed and a plant, folks, is that a weed is just in the wrong place. It's still a plant. You can still grow it. You can still cultivate it. Now, there's some weeds I would say let's not. But violets, hey, they're kind of naturally growing. They've naturalized at least. So you could let them continue to grow if they're not causing you a problem, and especially if you enjoy them. All right. So moving on from violets, let's talk about something a little bit different, something with a pungent flavor and smell for sure. This would be wild onions and wild garlic. Now, I know a lot of times we look out at the little grass-like bunches of wild garlic and wild onions, and we call it garlic, we call it onions, but there's actually a difference. They're both going to be perennial. Yikes. So perennial weeds means that they not only flower and produce more babies, but they themselves, that individual plant, is going to make it through winter and summer and come right back. You know that wild onions and garlic have the little bulbs underground. They have little white bulbs underground that they multiply underground asexually as well. But then, of course, they can flower and they can reseed, so it can become a big problem. Now, before we talk about how to control these babies, let's talk about how to identify them. The first way you can identify the difference between a wild onion and wild garlic is this. Wild onions have flat leaves, and wild garlic has round leaves. Wild onions have flat leaves, and wild garlic has round leaves. Now, I know you want to know how to get rid of these terrible weeds in your landscape, and you're just going to have to hang on tight through this break, and we'll get back to talking about how to get rid of those terrible smelling weeds, wild onions and wild garlic.
Tune in Saturday mornings at 9 for live editions of Let's Get Growing on 93.9 FM and AM 1350 WRWH Radio.
Back to more Let's Get Growing with Nathan Wilson.
All right, gang, we are having a fun time here in the studio. Buster's just informed me that the camera on Facebook Live is not working at the moment, but that's okay. I believe we're still streaming the audio at least, so if you're listening in, hang on tight. You won't get to see my beautiful face, but that's okay because it probably would scare you this early in the morning anyhow. But as we left the last break, we were talking about wild onions and garlic. Before I talk about that, let me mention that when Dean and I were talking about adding a garden program here at WRWH, he said, well, would you like to do it in the wintertime? I said, sure. I was going to ask you if you'd let me do it in the wintertime. It doesn't seem like, hey, there's a lot to do outside. there is plenty to do outside. It's a great time to plant. It's a great time. You got to pull your weeds, and we're talking about that right now. But the reality is, it's not that there's not a lot to do. It's just the weather is not conducive for us to want to get out there. But I hope that despite how many layers you need to bundle up and how much raincoats you need to put on, you still get out and you continue to grow. So back to wild onions and garlic. Wild onions, of course, like I mentioned, you can identify them because they have flat leaves, and garlic has round leaves. If you cut the leaf in half, you'll see either a tube, like a circular straw, that would be a wild garlic, or if you cut it and it looks flat like a thin piece of paper, that would be your wild onion. Now, they are a bit hard to control. That's the problem. These wild onions and garlic are hard to control. Why? Because they form these clumps. And I've already mentioned they have these bulbs underground, which if pulled apart, if one bulb is left behind, it will continue to grow and add another clump to your landscape. And that's why they're hard to separate. Once you try to pull them apart, you may leave a few underground. And again, big problem. Another issue is that the leaves themselves may be pulled away from the bulb, but the bulb is still underground. If you're going to go out there and lift these babies from underground, you're going to want to get some kind of fork or spade, maybe a shovel even, and get right beside them, maybe 3 or 4 inches away from the base of the clump. Get your shovel under the ground, push it in the ground, and then lift the soil up, okay? Once you do that, once you get down deep enough, probably 8 inches, the depth of a shovel should be plenty deep. But once you can get underneath those bulbs and lift them up, that takes a lot of pressure, soil pressure off of the bulbs. You can start to remove some of the soil around those bulbs and start to pull it out that way. But most of the time, at least in my experience, if you walk out into the landscape and just start pulling off the tops of the onions and garlics, you're not going to get the whole plant. You're just going to get the leaves, because it's and a lot of plants have done this. They've kind of evolved in a way, changed in a way over time that even though the top gets pulled off, it easily separates from the base. And of course, you can continue to have those problems. Now, you can also kill them with chemistry, but it's hard because these types of plants, they have a very waxy coating on their leaf. Now, we call this the cuticle. Look at your nails, your cuticle on your hands. But this is a cuticle around the plant. It's a layer of wax around the plant. Now, every plant has a cuticle, and that's something that's important for plants to be able to continue to grow away from a source of water. But like algae, which grows in the water, of course, it doesn't have a cuticle. But a plant that's not has water readily available, it has a cuticle to try to keep water in. It's a waxy coating. Well, in particular, these babies, they have a very waxy coating, and that leads chemistry to just roll right off. So what you have to use is you have to use a surfactant. I believe we talked about surfactants before, and you think, what the heck is a surfactant? I've never heard that. It sounds very technical and very weird. Well, it's not, because you got a surfactant probably underneath your sink, and it's called dish soap. I won't use any particular name, but any kind of dish soap that you would use to wash dishes in the sink with can be used as a surfactant. Now, you can go and buy horticultural or agricultural surfactants, but it's just as cheap to use something, and it smells lemony fresh. So you can go out there and you can go spray those nasty smelling weeds with something very nice and fresh, some lemony, or I don't know, maybe cotton or linen, whatever flavor you can get your hands on. But you add that to your chemistry after you've mixed it, and then you can apply that to the plant, and it actually helps to adhere the chemistry onto the leaf, this waxy coating. So again, today we talked about the annual bluegrass, which is a nice little bunch grass that's going to reseed and reseed, so you better get those babies out of there. The chickweed, which not only is it edible, but they form large mats of foliage which can push out other plants. And then the violet, of course, which is a beautiful plant but can reseed and continue to come back year after year. And then wild onions and garlics, which are hard to control, but you can do it. And the way you want to do this with any of these is, of course, you can spot spray. If you come to Lanier Nursery and Gardens, we have plenty of Bonide products. Bonide not only utilizes chemistry, but it also utilizes organic controls. And the organic controls can be just as effective, and if used appropriately, of course. But you can spot spray these weeds to kind of control them and get rid of them, or you can, of course, go the old-fashioned route, like Liberty Hyde Bailey probably would have done, and just pull them out. Just pull them out. It takes a little bit of work, of course, but if you pace yourself and section off areas that need to be accomplished, then you'll be in really good shape. So this morning, folks, we have talked a bit about winter weeds, which is a perfect time because winter weeds are all around and they are out there for sure. So you want to make sure you get a jump start on those before they reseed, because if you do, you will have the same. If you don't, you will have the same problem you had this year, next year, and you don't need that. You don't need that. But we're going to move on. I want to remind you that you can ask your question if you like to on Facebook Live. You can go to our live stream this morning, and you can ask any question you like. Maybe you have a problem inside the house, which we're about to talk about some houseplants. But if you have a problem inside the house with your houseplants, feel free to give me a call, and we'll be glad to help you. That number is 706-865-3181. All right, now speaking of houseplants. Houseplants, of course, are a great way to get growing and doing so in the garden. It's cold outside, but it can be very busy inside. And now is a great time to start dividing and propagating your houseplants and your tropical plants. Of course, these are plants that are not going to be hardy outside. These are plants that you may be kept out in the wintertime. You kept out in the summertime, but you've brought them in before it got too cold, because once it gets too cold, you can start to have death in your tropical garden. But you bring them inside, you keep them at room temperature, maybe just a little bit cooler. Somewhere in the 60s would be ideal. And you can see growth continue to happen, and you can see a bounty and flourishing happen even inside. You don't even have to walk outside with a houseplant. You just stay in the comfort of your own living room. Number one, let's talk about dividing something like Boston fern. Of course, Boston ferns are very popular in the South. They make a beautiful fern, whether you want to hang it on your front porch or put it in an urn by the front door, wherever you want to put it. They make a great plant. But if you haven't forgotten it already, if it's inside and you did bring it inside, it's not outside, the fern is probably super huge and overflowing from its container. Well, you can simply divide that and make more. What you would want to do is to remove the plant from its container, look underneath. You'll probably find a root ball full of beautiful white roots, which is the way you want it to be. And you can take a sharp knife or some kind of tool that can cut and pierce, and you could divide that root ball into quarters, maybe even more if you're a little adventurous. But you can take those quarters. They'll have a root on the bottom, and they'll have a plant on top above the soil line, and you can pot those up into another container. And inside, and in that container, they will continue to grow. And by the time spring comes, you may have 4 or 5 new Boston ferns. And guess what? They were free, essentially. You bought one, but you got 3 more for free. So you can do that, of course. But if you don't want to go to all that trouble, you can always come visit me in the spring at Lanier Nursery and Gardens, and I'll have plenty of ferns for your pleasure. Another plant that's very popular and very beautiful, but won't make it outside during the wintertime, is wandering Jew. Wandering Jew, of course, is actually in the Tradescantia family. It's in the Tradescantia family, which, if you're familiar with spiderwort, that's essentially what that is a spiderwort. And so if you are into that kind of thing, or maybe you already have them, if you already have them, then what you would want to do is to just make cuttings. All you got to do, they root very easily. You just take maybe 4 to 6 inches off of each little stem, strip off the lower 3 or 4 sets of leaves, leave 2 or 3 above ground, stick it in a pot. Or you can actually probably stick it in water. I know I was at my aunt's house the other day, and she did the same thing for her wandering Jew. She had stuck it in the water, and it's continuing to grow. They're going to be great. So wandering Jew is easy to make more babies, and by springtime, you could have a wonderful gift for a friend or just more for yourself. Lastly, another popular plant that I enjoy is spider plant. Spider plant is a great tropical plant, great house plant, but of course it can live outside during the warm season. But this is super easy. Spider plant is super easy to propagate, and you probably have no failures. And I tell you what, I'm going to tell you how to propagate that as soon as we get back from the break. And actually, Chris has a question on Facebook Live. So hang on tight, Chris. After this short break, we'll be right back to talk more about houseplants.
Tune in Saturday mornings at 9 for live editions of Let's Get Growing on 93.9 FM and AM 1350 WRWH Radio.
More great information coming your way on Let's Get Growing with Nathan Wilson.
All right, folks, we are having fun here in the studio. Buster and I are here to help you. Of course, if you'd like to give us a phone call this morning about your landscape or your houseplants, as we're talking about this morning, feel free to call me at 706-865-3181. Or you can also type in your message at our Facebook page. You can go to Lanier Nursery and Gardens. We had to send it that way, but definitely check out Facebook.com, search Lanier Nursery and Gardens, and you're going to find our program streaming live there this morning. All right, so we were talking about spider plant. Spider plant's a beautiful plant that can make this nice weeping, very kind of southern classic potted plant, and makes a great hanging basket. But they have these long tendrils that fall off, that kind of hang down. It looks very spidery, right? And then on the tips of these tendrils are more little babies. These would we call like pups, maybe little pup plants. All you have to do is remove the pup from that tendril and plant it in a little jar of soil, a little cup of soil, something just laying around, nothing special, and it will root. It will root very readily. Most likely, by the time you get to it, that spider plant will already have roots growing on that little pup. So definitely check that out. That is us talking about houseplants and how to propagate them and make more of them. But Chris has joined us. I hope he's still there on Facebook Live. And he asked us, why is my peace lily blooms look burnt? Why do my peace lily blooms look burnt? Now, Chris, most likely if the plant is healthy and the leaves themselves are not browning, it sounds like you probably are just experiencing the blooms finishing up. The peace lily blooms are usually white, or there are some pink varieties. Let's talk about that. The bloom on the peace lily is a spath. That's S-P-A-T-H, a spath. And it's a nice cup-shaped blossom with a strong central, that's the spath part, in the center. If you're on Facebook Live, I'll use my fingers as an example. Very easy to see the difference in the peace lily blooms. Now, the peace lily, again, is a beautiful flowering plant. It has dark green, luscious leaves. But if the leaves look fine, Chris, I think that you're just experiencing the bloom going out of style. It's dying away. The plant will be fine, assuming that the leaves look fine. Now, you may experience really black, burnt-look leaves with peace lily, and that's very possible. It can be a water issue. If you're watering too much, they can turn pretty black. If you don't water enough, they tend to kind of wilt pretty bad. So if your plant, Chris, looks pretty healthy, it's no problem. Your bloom, you were able to enjoy it. It was a nice white maybe, or a nice pink, or whatever color. Now it's turning brown. It's just part of the life cycle. It's fading away. So what you want to do with that, Chris, is take a pruning shear or some kind of scissors. You might be able to use scissors. Go down deep into the plant and find that stem that flower is on, and just sever it. Just sever it from the base. You'll get rid of that long, tall spike that it's on, and that will actually encourage your plant to maybe bloom more. So because it's an indoor plant, you can go ahead and fertilize it if you haven't fertilized it lately. Give it a nice slow-release fertilizer. If you're looking for a good slow-release fertilizer, you can come visit me at Lanier Nursery and Gardens, Chris, where I've got some. Yes, Chris says his plant looks healthy. And thanks for the advice. No, we're glad. Thanks for the question. Now, what I want to tell you is that if you need some slow-release fertilizer, come visit me at Lanier Nursery and Gardens. We've got a great 2 to 3 month slow-release fertilizer, and that will give that plant a little extra boost. Anytime that you're removing something from a plant, it's always a good idea to give back to it. Matt joins us on Facebook Live, and he asks, what's the best houseplants to keep cleaner air? What's the best houseplant to keep cleaner air? Well, Matt, the answer to that would be any plant. Every plant is going to take away carbon dioxide out of the air, which, of course, is what we breathe, CO2. It's what we breathe out, excuse me. So as humans, we breathe in oxygen, but we release carbon dioxide, which, of course, so our cars release carbon monoxide as exhaust. And so there's all this carbon in the air, and carbon in the air is not necessarily a good thing. What we want to have is we want to have a cleaner air, right, Matt? So any of these plants that we've talked about, of course, is going to be great. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, Matt. In order to keep your air super clean, you're going to need a lot of plants in your house. I've been to some folks' house that you really feel like you walked into a jungle when you walk in, but it's beautiful. It's fine. It's an indoor garden, right? It's an indoor garden. Thinking about indoor gardens reminds me of my several trips to Nashville. And every time I go to Nashville, I never stay at the Gaylord Opryland Hotel, but I always visit there so that I can see the indoor gardens they have. And they really have jungles inside of their hotel. They have these beautiful conservatories full of tropical plants. I mean, everything is just gorgeous. Everything from palms and little tiny orchids all the way to fiddle leaf figs. There's a beautiful fiddle leaf fig that I noticed this last time that I went a few months ago. And anyhow, they definitely have created a jungle. But you can do the same thing. Again, that's a place, right? And there's a sense of place even when you're walking under this glass dome because of what they've done with plants. And you can do the same for your house. Right, Matt? You can get out there and get some more plants to clean your air, but also create a sense of place even indoors. So, enough about house plants. Maybe we'll come back to those a little bit later. I want to remind you, though, that now is a great time to plant trees and shrubs. Trees and shrubs can be planted now all the way through winter as long as the soil does not freeze. Now, folks, generally the soil does not freeze in our area, but I will mention last year when we had that deep freeze for 10 to 14 days, I believe that we had some frozen soil because I could not pierce it with a shovel, and that was a sharp shovel too. So right now the soil temperature is 47 or so. 47 degrees from 2 to 8 inches down. I averaged it out last night. That's a great time. That's a great temperature to have to be planting. Still is appropriate to plant pansies and violas if you can find some. We've got a few left at the nursery. Generally, Thanksgiving is about the end of that season. But right now, you can continue to plant those. But trees and shrubs, if you plant them now, those roots will continue to grow. They'll continue to grow. And of course, what happens over the winter is they're going to grow a great root system. They're going to grow a great root system so that you can then have a strong source of water. Whereas if you plant it in the summertime, all you have is a smaller root system. You get a good, large root system, and the plant will be able to absorb so much more water when it does get really hot in the oncoming summertime. And, of course, those plants aren't growing above ground, especially deciduous ones, and evergreen ones slow down dramatically, probably don't grow at all above ground. So it's great because they're not using as much water, so they don't need as much water. So I know that you're going to get spring fever. You're going to rush out to the nursery in the spring, and you're going to say, I want to plant $1,000 worth of plants. Well, I hope you do at least. But it's going to be tough to keep those plants alive without watering or irrigation. But if you do it now, you come out, yes, it's cold, yes, well, it's rainy, but we can wait for the rain to lighten up some. But if you do it now, you're going to have so much more success. You're going to be so much more successful. And if you decide to do that this week or this weekend, well, not a great day for this weekend, maybe after all this weather is past. If you decide to do some when the weather lightens up, remember, I have a 4-step plan for planting trees and shrubs. Number 1, if you plant a containerized plant, you want to dig a wide hole. You want to dig the hole wide enough that it's at least 3 times as wide as a root ball. So that sounds pretty big, and it is. It needs to be as wide as it can. But number 2 is you don't have to dig down very deep. Just dig down as deep as the root ball itself. Dig down as deep as the root ball itself. Very easy on that part. Number 3 would be to soften the soil as much as possible. If you soften the soil as much as possible, you get great contact with the roots to the soil, and the roots are more likely to spread out and grow into that very soft soil. And number 4, probably the most important step you cannot forget or miss, is to come visit me at Lanier Nursery and Gardens to fill that hole with a beautiful tree or shrub that you can then enjoy for years to come. You can enjoy them for years to come. All right, that is planting trees and shrubs, and I think that you're going to really enjoy that. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, I want to remind you that you can easily share this message that we're giving today. Just go down to the button that says share and share it on your page and let your friends know about Let's Get Growing, because we want to help everybody that we can. So be sure to do that. Now, moving on to something that I really don't care to talk about is lawn. As a plant person, as a nurseryman, I don't sell lawn, and actually I think we need to use less of lawn. But until we see the light that we need more horticultural plants and less turf grass, I will give you tips, because it's very important that you take care of your lawn to keep it fresh, to keep it healthy, and to keep it disease-free. Number one right now that you need to be doing is you need to be raking your leaves. If you rake the leaves off the plant, off of the turf grass, you will be helping your grass so much. The problem with leaving piles of wet leaves is that they cause rot. Your turf grass can rot very easily when it's under a thick layer of wet leaves, and you will find that those leaves at the bottom will be very wet. You don't want to cause rot on any of your turf grasses. Scrape it away, pull it away, rake it away, blow it away with a blower, whatever suits your fancy, just get those leaves off of there. Now, we're getting to the point where it's probably crucial to do that. Most of the leaves on the trees have fallen. Most people will blow them weekly. That may not be necessary, but you could do it every 2 weeks until they've all fallen, and then once all the leaves have fallen, there's no more blowing. But if you don't, you will be left with issues. You'll be left with issues for sure. Rot issues. You don't want that. But you ask me, what about planting turf grass? I've had a lot of calls at the nursery asking, can I plant Bermuda? Can I plant sod right now? Well, here's my 3 tips about that. Number one, it's not the best time, but it's possible. Right now, the turf grass is not going to be growing. It's not going to be growing, so it really doesn't make sense to. It's just going to sit there. But if you do it right, you can get away with it. Number two, the wintertime can damage the Bermuda, especially if it's not touching the soil. Sometimes we just throw the lawn out there, throw the sod out there onto the ground, and we don't get good contact with the roots to the soil. So we need to make sure not that we're compacting the soil, but we got to make sure that we're working the roots of the lawn, of the sod, down onto the soil. We make sure that we're getting good contact, or those areas can become damaged by winter if they don't have good contact. Number 3, if you're not watering enough in the winter, you can cause it to dry out and it might die. Now, that's not a good situation to have. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that the sod is staying moist. It's very easy because the roots are not growing down into the soil. They're going to rely on you or Mother Nature to give them the water. They won't be able to access the water in the ground until probably into the summer, because they're not going to be growing much at all, very little. But if you are able to keep the sod moist but not wet and not dry, then you'll have pretty good success. So again, Bermuda sod can be done now, but folks, you might as well wait until late winter, early spring, because that's when the Bermuda grass will start flushing out as soon as it gets warm, and the roots are going to start taking off. If you just lay it on the ground now, it's not going to do much growing, because Bermuda grass loves it hot, does not like it cold, and you want to make sure that you get as much success as possible. Okay, I think I've had enough discussion about turf grass. I'm tired of that. Let's move on. Let's talk about plants. I want to talk about Christmas plants. Christmas plants and gift ideas. Have you already done shopping for your grandma? Have you already done shopping for your mother? If you're like me, you probably have not. No, I've done some shopping, but I want to give you an idea. House plants, which we've already talked about, make the perfect Christmas gift, especially poinsettias. Poinsettias are classic. They're a classic flower, and they have a classic plant for Christmas. They have these large, colorful flower petals, which actually aren't petals at all. They're actually bracts. That's B-R-A-C-T-S, bracts, or simply modified leaves. They're nothing more than modified leaves. But regardless, they are perfect for gift giving. And be sure that you tell your loved one, if you give them a poinsettia, to keep them in the house, of course, but in a cooler part of the house, a cooler room. Not necessarily the one right by the fireplace. You don't want them to be that hot. They don't like freezing, of course, but high temperatures can cause the flowers and the leaves to fall off prematurely. Now, Danielle is on Facebook Live sending us a question. We're going to answer her question as soon as we get right back.
Tune in Saturday mornings at 9 for live editions of Let's Get Growing on 93.9 FM and AM 1350 WRWH Radio.
Back to more Let's Get Growing with Nathan Wilson.
Danielle has given us a question this morning, and Danielle, we're going to answer that question. But I was talking before we left, that we were talking about poinsettias. Now, poinsettias are classic and make a great houseplant, and I left out the most important part about poinsettias. They are available at Lanier Nursery and Gardens, where you can find me weekly, Monday through Saturday. Just check us out, Lanier Nursery and Gardens, to find us. We're conveniently located very close to 985 in Oakwood, so just a little drive, and you can have some fun. And anyhow, so be sure to come and check those out. Our poinsettias are not shipped in from some far-off exotic place. Well, maybe, but it's Coweta County, Georgia. So when you come shop at Lanier Nursery Gardens, you know that you're supporting local farm families, because we have a number of growers we work very closely with to produce quality plants, both for inside the house and outside the house. And in this case, these come from Coweta County, from our growers, our friends down that way. Now, Danielle, I see she's told me her maiden name. And Danielle says, "Hey, stranger, it's been years." She did. She was a church member with us. It's good to hear you. I'm glad that you gave us your question. Now, Danielle's question this morning, she says, and I love the way she words it here. She says, "I have a gardenia bush in my front yard and a black thumb." What a great combination, a gardenia bush in the front yard and a black thumb. And she says, "Do I need to trim it, or did I miss my window?" Okay, Danielle. It doesn't sound like you haven't made a note that, things that there's a problem with the plant. Maybe it's just big, or maybe it looks overgrown. You have missed the window on pruning. So pruning in the winter time, let me back up. Pruning is not a good thing, okay? Pruning is there's never a good time to prune, because you're always damaging the plant. But it is necessary, Danielle. But right now, if there's a good time to prune and a bad time to prune, now is the worst time. Now is the worst time. What you're going to do, Danielle, is you're going to enjoy the holidays. You're going to enjoy the new year. You're going to take some time from holiday festivities, even all the way into February and March. And she says it looks overgrown. So it's no problem. It's going to look overgrown for a while, but in the springtime, you just want to trim them back. Really, about... let's see, for gardenia, I would say let's wait till about April or so. So early April, you could probably start doing that. I always like to watch the weather, Danielle, to see if I'm really conservative with my pruning. I want to make sure that there's not going to be a hard freeze, because the issue with pruning this time of year, or any time when freeze is a possibility, is that a fresh cut in the wintertime is not going to heal, because the plant's not growing. It's like getting a cut that never heals. It's not good. And if you get water in there and it freezes, then you've got major issues. You've got winter damage. So I always encourage people, even though it's overgrown right now, Danielle, if you can kind of overlook it, the best thing for the plant would be wait until it's about to just pop out and flush out. And if you want to, Danielle, gardenias are pretty resilient. You can cut them pretty far back. I don't know how big it is, but you can cut it pretty far back if you want to. Get it down to below the height that you'd like it to be. Maybe take off a third of the plant, get it down lower than you'd like it to be, and it will flush back out, and it will become the size that you want it to be. So, Danielle, thanks for tuning in and listening. I hope that you share this message with your friends so they can hear about your plant troubles. But it's not a trouble anymore, because now you know what to do. So hope to see you soon. All right, so we are back at talking about all things gardening. All things gardening. I want to talk a little bit about individual plants now. We've got a few more moments that we can talk about specific plants. And I want to talk about evergreens first of all. I've got 5 awesome evergreens. 5 awesome evergreens for you to add to your landscape. Number 1 is Globosa nana cryptomeria. Oh gosh, that sounds terrible, doesn't it? Well, cryptomerias are Japanese cedars, okay? But cryptomeria sounds a lot better than Japanese cedar, doesn't it? But normally cryptomerias are huge. I mean, they're huge. They get probably 60 to 100 foot in their lifetime. 60, let me say it again, 60 to 100 foot in their lifetime. I mean, yes, I guess the some of the skyscrapers in what's that city? New York City, the biggest one in the world, right? No. Those skyscrapers would dwarf these kinds of plants, but you can get a true dwarf in your landscape. It's called Globosa nanocryptomera. Very soft, fluffy puffball. Beautiful. They stay round. The word Globosa nana means small globe. So they actually stay very small and tight and make these nice kind of lime green. They're not very deep green, but a beautiful lime green color, but not yellow either. Don't think it's that lime, but a very light green color. And they can just add a nice, fill a corner up for you, put it at the end of a pathway or a walkway, and it will look really hot. Number 2, another beautiful evergreen, is called snow green arborvitae. Snow green arborvitae, you probably will not find anywhere. I have not, except one guy that I work with who grows them. He is in Commerce, Georgia. Beautiful plants. They were actually released by a gentleman named J.C. Ralston out of the Carolinas. He was a big name in horticulture. He's no longer living, but big name in horticulture, released a lot of plants, major horticulturalist, and he released this one, but it didn't really take on. But my friend in Commerce has been growing them since then, and they probably get 3 to 4 foot. He said in 30 years it's only about 4 foot tall, so it grows pretty slow, but they're beautiful. This is a very fringy foliage. It's got this kind of green color on the inside, but the tips are frosted white. Frosted white. Now, you're probably going to the internet to look up snow green arborvitae, and it's so rare I can't find any information about it online, but you can at Linear Nursery and Gardens. We're going to get a shipment in pretty soon, and you can enjoy those. A small, tight little plant that's going to give you good contrast with the green foliage on the inside, kind of a blue-green foliage, and then the gray, white tips. That's how it gets its name, snow green. Number 3 is the upright plum yew. It's another great evergreen, an awesome evergreen. It will only get about 2, maybe 3 foot wide, but easily pruned as well, and it goes straight up. It goes straight up. It's what we call fastigiate, which I think I used that word last year, last program. But fastigiate is a word that just means pencil-like or column-like, column shape. So this is a column-style plant. I've already talked about round plants, but here's a column plant for you. If you need something that fits in a corner or fits by the doorway or by a pathway that you want to just go vertical, the upright plum yew would be beautiful. If you're familiar with creeping plum yew, it's a very closely related plant. Creeping plum yew crawls along the ground, is very prostrate in form, but this guy in particular goes straight up in the air, beautiful, dark green all year long. Number 4 of my awesome evergreen plants is going to be the golden globe arborvitae. This is another arborvitae, but stays really tight, about 3 to 4 foot, and creates this kind of golden globe. That's exactly how it gets its name. There's no other way to describe it. It's round. It's got golden tips, and deep on the inside are going to be a darker green. So you do get a good contrast with that. Beautiful foliage. It has that cedary cypress smell, too. If you crush the leaves, it smells really great. Number 5 of my awesome evergreens will be anise. Anise or Alyssium is a plant that gets its name, anise, from the smell that its leaves give off when the leaf is crushed. It smells like licorice when it's crushed. It smells like licorice when it's crushed. Beautiful plant. They can get quite large. They do stay nice, deep green all year long. But we do have a form at the nursery called Florida Sunshine, which is a beautiful yellow chartreuse color. It has a little more height control, probably only 5 to 6 foot. You could use the regular anise as a screen if you wanted an evergreen screen, but you could also use this yellow one, the Florida Sunshine anise, as a nice hot specimen or just something to attract some attention in the landscape. All right, so that is my top 5 awesome evergreens that if you don't have them in your landscape, I would say you need to come to Lanier Nursery and Gardens and check them out for sure. Before we wrap today's program, I want to remind you that Christmas is almost here. And what are you going to give? What are you going to give? I say give the gift of life. I say give a tree or a shrub to a family member. Why? Well, here's the 4 reasons why you need to gift a tree or shrub this year. Number 1, it's a great time to plant. We've already talked about that. It's the best time to plant. You've got to get out there. You've got to give those roots a chance to grow. And no better time than Christmas time to give the gift of life through a tree or a shrub. Number 2, if you give somebody technology or electronics, well, they're going to quickly become outdated and replaced soon. But remember, trees and shrubs, they won't need to be replaced for a lifetime, and most likely they should outlive both you and I. So they're going to last a very long time, where that a new Apple iPad is going to be replaced in probably 6 months. That's all they do. Just continue to give out new technology. But we don't need that with plants. They last forever. For a long time. Number 3, if you give clothings and handbags, well, they're going to go out of style, Have you seen your wife's closet lately full of handbags from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s? They're all different styles. They just get put away or sent to Goodwill after a good 5 or 10 years. But plants will never go out of style. They will provide intrigue and inspiration for decades at least. At least they're going to last for several decades. And lastly, the 4th reason you want to give a gift or tree or shrub is cookies and candies will quickly be forgotten after they're consumed. But trees and shrubs will always be there to remind your loved ones of Christmas 2018. Be sure to give a gift that counts, a gift that matters. And folks, Christmas is a great time. It's a great time to give a gift to remember something that happened. To remember something that happened this year. Perhaps there was a birth in the family, and perhaps, sadly, there was a death. This year would be a great year to give a living gift that will remind not just this generation, but future generations of that loved one or that new child that was born. So, folks, I hope that we see you again next week, because I'll be right here, and we'll talk more about Christmas and gardening in winter. Have a great weekend.
Thanks for joining us for today's Let's Get Growing program with Nathan Wilson. If you have a comment about today's program, you can reach out to Nathan by sending an email to grow@laniernursarygardens.com. Join us next Saturday for Let's Get Growing on Local News Radio 93.9 FM and AM 1350.